Hi everyone, it's John Heath here again for Milton Rose Learning with another Let's Learn lesson on how to ace Lord of the Flies. So it's a good old writing sesh today for anybody who's kind of having to do exams or essay questions on Lord of the Flies. So we're going to look at unpacking exam questions and how we break those down first, because that's a really important thing that you need to be able to do. If you want to write really well on Lord of the Flies. Then number two, we'll look at just broadly how your teacher marks your Lord of the Flies essays, because it's very important to know that, otherwise you're kind of writing blind. And then thirdly, we'll just look at a really nice chunk of top grade writing on Lord of the Flies and how the assessment objectives are met in that writing, so you can obviously apply the same lessons. Okay then, right, let's dive in. So first off, we've got what I would call unpacking essay questions. Now, if you've watched any of the other kind of writing masterclass videos, it's in some ways it's always the same game that you're playing. You must break down the essay question conceptually before you start writing. Okay, if you don't and you dive in and you start just writing whatever jumps into your head, don't expect to do particularly well. Okay, you've got to get a grip on what you're actually writing and where the car is going, effectively, if I put it as a metaphor. So we break down the keywords and concepts in any question to get a grip on it. So let's do that. So the first little part, we've set up a question here. How does Golding represent the conflict between civilization and savagery in Lord of the Flies? Okay, so the conflict between civilization and savagery in Lord of the Flies. Now, if I was teaching the class at school, this is what I would do. I'd go, right, let's break apart the keywords, everyone. So the first one is, this is a how question. So that focuses our minds for this essay on the language and the literary devices. So what does Golding use? Well, he uses allegorical figures, because every boy and every character on the island is a symbol of a different part of our psyche and society at large. Radical symbolism to project a pessimistic conception of human nature. So that how is actually a very important part of the question. It's actually focusing our mind on the methods, the literary devices which Golding is using. Then we have the big man himself, Golding. Okay, now Golding is actually in the question. So we must explore then how Golding constructs meaning in this text. So his use of obviously narrative, characterization, the dramatic setting of the tropical island. I mean, the island itself is almost a character in some weird way, and symbols such as the conch to communicate Golding's ideas of human nature, such as the animus dominandi, which is the idea that we've all got hardwired into our biology a desire to dominate others. It's called animus dominandi. So it invites us to look at form, structure, and Golding's authorial intentions. Okay, and I think that's very, very important if you want to get the high marks. Then we have one of the boys looking very deadly there. The word conflict is a key concept in the question. So it's a key word that calls for analysis of tension, opposition, and armed struggle on the island, not just between the characters, but if you're very clever, the conflict between ideas, between instincts, between forces. Look for clashes in the book, so between democracy and dictatorship, order versus chaos, and things like that, so we can think more conceptually than just conflict between two of the boys. Okay, it's a clash of ideas as much as a clash of children. And then the last two, very quickly, we have civilization is a key concept in the question. The boys are looking relatively sedate there. So civilization, well, that symbolises order, structure, morality, and our ethics. So the social contract, the idea that, you know, we give up some of our rights to live in peace, to live in a world of laws, and that's represented by Ralph, Piggy, the conch, the shelters, and the signal fire. So consider how these start very strong, but those symbols gradually collapse, don't they? Because they're not strong enough to kind of to overcome the animus dominandi that we spoke about. And then the last key concept in there is the word savagery, isn't it? So that stands for instinct, violence, the desire and primal fear that causes violence most of the time. So savagery is embodied in the characters of Jack, Roger, the chants that they kind of roll out over the island, and the Lord of the Flies itself. So savagery rises as civilization weakens. Okay, it's what they call a zero-sum game. So as civilization declines, then the savagery increases to fill the gap. Okay. Now you can see, just before we go on, that's a complex question. There's a lot of conceptual stuff that they're asking you there. So don't dive in. I think if you dive in, you're always going to be onto a loser. Kind of break it down conceptually like that and you won't go far wrong. Okay, I promise that will always put you on a much better kind of footing before you start writing on Lord of the Flies. Then the second one is assessment objectives. So your teacher does not mark your work blind, and the examiner definitely doesn't mark your work blind. They have assessment objectives. They have targets that you need to hit and hit really well if you want to get the marks on Lord of the Flies. So with that in mind, the assessment objectives change over time and they change between exam boards, but generally it's always the same kind of game that you're playing. And these are the broad assessment objectives that you are kind of always going to be hitting, to be honest, or trying to hit with Lord of the Flies. So the first one is academic expression. We want your essays to sound professional, polished, no slang. You need to be using subject-specific vocabulary, so words like metaphor, adjectives, juxtaposition, circular structure. Those kinds of terms need to be used to show that I know my literary terms. Okay, academic expression is how does this essay sound effectively, so make it sound as good as you can. Number two, what I would call detailed analysis, is basically zooming in. So if you don't zoom in on keywords and phrases when you select quotes, then you've got a real problem. Okay, and there are some students who don't use any quotes at all, and then you've got a double problem there. So you must zoom in on quotes. You must explore the writer's methods and their impact. And when we say impact, we mean the emotional impact and the emotional effects that the language is creating on the reader. So, in Lord of the Flies, there's loads of moments, isn't there? So say when that conch, the conch shell which they use, it symbolises like order in the society. But if you know the book, it shatters into a million pieces. So when that happens, that creates shock and it appalls the reader, because you now know that they're going to descend into savagery. So you always have to think about the reader, always be in touch with the emotional effect on the reader, and then that will help you to hit detailed analysis. Then number three is what I always call the big ideas or themes. Okay. Now the weaker students, what they tend to do is they just talk about the events of the book, almost like the children are real. But you don't want to do that. Don't just talk about the plot, because your teacher's already read the book, so they don't need to be told the plot chapter and verse. So instead, go deeper. Think about the themes, the deeper political messages of the text, and Golding's authorial intention. What is Golding trying to tell us about human nature? And if you can, for the high marks, look at alternative interpretations as well. Often in this book, as any literary text, you can interpret characters and scenes in more than one way, sympathetically or unsympathetically, for instance. So always try, well, not always, but sometimes try and give those alternative interpretations, and then you're starting to tease out the big ideas and themes a little bit better. Then the last assessment objective is context. Now, context is the history and the social elements that were going on when the text was written. So writers don't just live in a bubble. They are influenced by what's happening historically at the time that it was written, and you need to understand that. So, for instance, I've just put an example there. In post-war England, because this is after the Second World War, there was an increasing social anxieties about the horrors of nuclear conflict because nuclear bombs had been designed and used in 1945 that are directly reflected in Lord of the Flies as the boys' society descends into savagery. So Golding was worried, and society was worried about, well, if someone presses a nuclear button and just blows us all up, then civilization is over, isn't it? Humanity is dead. We would finish as a civilization. And the novel plays into those social anxieties. So you can see where you do a little bit of context and then you link it to the book. You must link, okay? If you don't link the context to the actual book and the question that you're answering, then you're going to have a problem, okay? So please do put the context in and then link it, okay? It's very, very important. Now, those are the 4 ways, very broadly, but those are the 4 ways in which your work is marked. So let's look at a really nice paragraph now, a top grade model paragraph for the question, and then we'll look at how it's hit with the assessment objectives. Now, the question was on the conflict between civilization and savagery, if you remember. So let's just have a nice little read of that, if you can indulge me for a second. The conflict between the forces of civilization and savagery intensifies through the breakdown of symbols like the conch, which is the big shell that they blow into to get everybody to listen. Originally a powerful emblem of order and democratic dialogue, the conch is eventually exploded into 1,000 white fragments, a moment that marks the complete collapse of civilization. The violent verb exploded and the image of fragmentation reinforced the destruction of not just the object, but of everything that it represented or symbolised. Immediately following this, Piggy, the voice of reason and logic, is killed, suggesting that once order is lost, violence and chaos take control. This moment also parallels historical events. Golding, having served in World War II, witnessed firsthand how civilised societies could descend into brutality, and this experience shapes his portrayal of human nature. Okay, really nice top grade model paragraph. Now let's just look very briefly at how the assessment objectives are met in that paragraph. Well, AO1, academic expression, it uses very formal, fluent language, precise phrasing. It sounds very posh and formal. It also uses subject terminology like symbol and portrayal of human nature, which is not subject terminology, but it's advanced expression. So it's clearly hitting the first one, academic expression. Try and sound posh and formal if you can. AO2, if we can put it that way, is analysis of language and structure. So it does zoom in on keywords and it explores the effects. So for instance, the violent verb exploded, it is zooming in, I can't hold that against it. And it's linking structure and symbols, such as the conch exploding, to the plot's collapse. So it is implicitly talking about structure and exploring the effects of that as well, which is quite nice. Ideas and themes, it does develop a clear argument. It's a bit implicit, but it focuses on civilization versus savagery, and it does connect plot events such as Piggy's death and the conch exploding to the broader ideas, which is the collapse of civilization. So it's linking the narrative events to the big ideas, and I think that's quite hard to do, but it is doing it, and it's doing it quite well. And then context, well, there was the bit at the end, wasn't there? You had World War II context is integrated naturally to deepen the meaning. Golding's experiences in World War II and how they affected him when he started to write. So it shows his experience and how it shapes his view of human nature and, the animus dominandi, as I've said a few times. So it's clearly hitting those assessment objectives, to be honest, very nicely. It would need to do that throughout loads of other paragraphs to kind of get the marks, but it's well on the way to doing really, really well. Okay. Now, what you've had there then is a very quick rundown of how to approach Lord of the Flies. So remember to break down the essay question, very important. Bear in mind the assessment objectives of how your teacher is going to mark your work, and if you're unsure, please do ask your teacher and they'll give you a mark scheme and things like that. And then we've just had a very quick look at a model paragraph that you can use an exemplar for your own writing. So hopefully you found that interesting and reasonably fun, dare I say. Don't forget to hit the like, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you'll never miss another Let's Learn video again. If you have any questions, queries or comments and stuff, please do put them in the comments for this video, and we'll always do our best to reply. And it just remains to say, really, hopefully you found that useful. Thanks for listening and take care.